As we mentioned at the beginning of this show, heavy rains forced Husker harvest days to close Wednesday, but the largest amount of precipitation fell farther east. The National Weather Service in Omaha says the highest reported rainfall Tuesday came near Fort Calhoun at 5.5 inches. We told you in last week's episode parts of eastern Nebraska had already experienced their share of rainfall, with August precip in Lincoln placing in the top 10 over the last 100 years. While corn and soybean crops are at or near their 5-year averages for progress, the concerns over a long or delayed harvest are starting to become louder. And with this week's colder temperatures, so might the worries over an early frost. On Tuesday afternoon, we talked about these issues with DTN senior ag meteorologist Bryce Anderson and started by asking if we've seen an unusual amount of rain over the last few months.
We certainly have in the last part of the summer. July turned out to be a very dry month, relatively speaking. The thing that bailed crops out was the fact that temperatures were in many cases, in many stations across the Corn Belt, cool enough that they were in the top 5 historically for a cool July. And then, of course, we had fairly substantial rains in June, so there was soil moisture for crops to work with. And then we got into August, and here came the rains to kind of finish things off. Now we're in the first part of the fall season in terms of the weather records, and we're actually at a point now where I think everybody would like to see things dry up a little bit ahead of harvest.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a main concern here as we get going, that it's going to be a bit damp.
That's the real issue, Jeff. When we go into harvest season, our view is that harvest this year is going to shape up in a very similar fashion to 5 years ago in 2009. And in 2009, temperatures were rather cool, they were below normal, and then it was a wet harvest. And we actually got some early season snow because snow began in part of the western Corn Belt in early October and then never really quit. I don't think it's going to be quite that slow, but nonetheless, I think that we're going to have a cooler than normal scenario to work with on temperatures, and then above normal on precipitation, so that it's going to be a more dragged out harvest. It's going to be a longer process than I know a lot of growers would like.
Yeah, you said it's not going to be not as slow because it's not going to be quite as wet, or because it's going to be a little warmer?
I think it's going to be both a little bit warmer and then not quite as wet as we saw 5 years ago. That was a real problem. That was a flat out gnarly harvest. This year, it's going to be better than we saw 5 years ago, but still, it's going to take time for fields to get in condition to carry combines and trucks. It's going to take time for stalks and stems to get into condition in order to go through the combine. And then, of course, just grain drying itself. I think drying expense is going to be a big feature this year.
Another concern could be an early frost, because there is a lot of late planted, especially soybeans in specific parts of Nebraska. Do you see an early frost possibility?
I don't think we're in for an early frost here in the state. I think we're going to see a normal first frost in northern Nebraska. That would be in the first part of October, and then in central Nebraska more in the middle part of October. I think that it still could be early enough relative to crop maturity that it causes some setback in terms of total output, especially over the northern portion of the state.
You mentioned a snowstorm earlier. Is there anything on the radar that suggests we'll see something earlier than normal?
I think that we need to kind of be cautious about that because the prevailing temperature pattern that we've had here in the Midwest and the Corn Belt this year has been the domination of blocking high pressure over eastern Canada that keeps kind of funneling these below normal temperatures overall into the Midwest. And so because of that, it only takes one of those outbreaks to cause that type of a feature. We're getting through one in early September. I don't think we'll see another one for another couple weeks. And then it wouldn't be at all out of the question that by the middle part of October, there could be another sort of a little bit of an adventure with colder conditions coming in to cause that kind of a concern, that potential for an early season snowstorm.